Hey YouTube, today I've got a 1997 Dodge Ram 3500 with the 5.9 12 valve Cummins engine. The customer complaint today is that after this vehicle has sat a few hours, it is a really hard start. So let's give it a shot here. It's not particularly warm today, but it's not cold either. It's about 42 degrees here. Yeah, kind of a rough start. It's not running all six yet. All right, seems to be running better now. So let's get this guy to the shop and try to diagnose what's wrong with it. So one of the things I like to look for when trying to diagnose a hard start after it's been sitting a couple hours is to make sure that the fuel system is intact. We don't have any obvious, fuel leaks. As you can see here, there's a little bit of oil, motor oil, but nothing here is screaming out to me like, hey, fuel leak. We've got an air leak, that can cause a hard start. So those are the injectors. These guys right here are the injector lines, the high pressure injector lines, and the small lines down here are the return lines, which is a low pressure return line, and all of those look pretty good. Now over here we are at the injection pump, and these are the hard lines that go to the injectors. And as you can see here, there's really no evidence that we've had a loose connection where air can airlock the high side or the high pressure side of the fuel system. So the next couple of things to look for is, especially on a truck that's old like this, it's original, never really been tampered with, 200,000 miles or so. The fuel transfer pump, or otherwise known as a lift pump, it is the fuel pump that's bolted to the side of the block on these things. It is what provides the low pressure fuel to the injector pump. And its location is kind of a pain. Let's see if I can zoom in here. Okay, so that's the push button hand primer for the transfer pump, and that's the that's the push hand valve for the transfer pump. And it goes up to the fuel filter. Sorry about my poor video work here. So this is the top of the fuel filter housing. We've got the fuel injector return line coming into this banjo bolt. Come on, focus. Coming into that banjo bolt. And this is the fuel line that comes in and goes to the injector pump. All right. So one thing to do here is a good quick check is to check for fuel pressure. So what we'll do is we'll pull this banjo bolt off. We've got a fuel gauge here, and these are readily available fuel pressure adapters for these engines. It takes the place of the banjo bolt, and then you see here there's a fuel Schrader valve. There's a fuel pressure Schrader valve here that we can hook up to the fuel pressure gauge. And we can see what sort of fuel pressure this guy is running. And from there we can try to diagnose what the issue is, whether it's the fuel transfer pump or something else like the overflow valve on this P pump. All right, let me get set up with the fuel pressure and we'll get back to you in the next clip. Okay, real quickly here, I'll show you what I used to get to that banjo bolt. It's a 3/8 drive ratchet with a long extension, a universal, and a 17mm socket. And you can just sneak it over by the banjo bolt here and loosen it. Okay. There's not a whole lot of space here, so I apologize for the poor camera work. It's not a... Okay, so we have that banjo bolt broken free. I'm going to do is I'm going to take that out and put the fuel pressure adapter in its place. Keep in mind there are 2 crush washers here, which I will be replacing once I am done with this job. But for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and reuse them. So stand by. So I got the other banjo bolt out. I'm going to put this fuel pressure adapter in its place, and that simply screws in. And unfortunately, again, I just cannot get a good angle here for you. I'm sorry. And just slowly thread that in by hand. You don't want to strip it. And again, these things do not get tightened all that much. I think it's like 12 foot-pounds, not very tight. So go ahead and grab a wrench for that, give it a snug down, and connect the fuel pressure gauge and get to you in the next clip. Okay, so now we've got the fuel pressure adapter tightened down to 12 foot-pounds. And now I'm just going to screw my fuel pressure gauge adapter onto it, and we'll put the gauge in a suitable spot and get the truck running and see what the pressure is at. So now we've got the fuel pressure gauge hooked up, all the tools out of the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire this guy up and see what sort of fuel pressure we have. So as you can see there, we had what looks to be like a measly 5 psi. At idle, these things should be closer to 15 psi. So the next thing that we're going to suspect here and try to eliminate is the overflow valve on the side of the injection pump right here. Sometimes these have springs that get weak over time and they end up releasing the pressure before they're supposed to. So the way to check for that is we have to find the return line, the rubber return line coming off of the overflow valve here. Find the return line, clamp it off with some hose pliers, start her up, and see if the fuel pressure rises. If the fuel pressure rises, then we know the overflow, and it rises up to about 15 or so, we know that the overflow valve is faulty. If we clamp her off and the fuel pressure doesn't change any, then we know that the transfer pump is faulty here. So we want to use hose clamp pliers like these. They have a softer edge on them so that they don't end up cutting through the hose. And I'll end up having to show a picture of the fuel line diagram for this thing, but I found the return line. It's right here. I'm wiggling it with my fingers. I'm gonna go ahead and clamp that off with the hose clamp pliers. We'll start the vehicle back up. All right, it doesn't take much. Just clamp it off like so. So we're gonna go ahead and start the vehicle back up and see what our pressure does. So as you can see, the pressure didn't change any, and like I originally suspected, the lift pump, which is right here, that lift pump is probably bad. We've proved it by clamping off the return line, which eliminates the overflow valve as being a culprit. The owner of the truck had previously replaced a fuel filter about 3 days ago. Nothing wrong with the old oil filter or fuel filter. So we'll get a lift pump ordered for you, and we'll try to get a video on how to do that. Okay, so in preparation of getting this lift pump out, I'm going to go ahead and take the fuel filter out. And to do that, one of the first steps you need to do is find the water in fuel sensor that's attached to the bowl. Oh gosh, let's see if I can get focused here. See the end of this pigtail right here? It goes to the fuel bowl right there. That's the water in fuel sensor. So we'll need to disconnect it. You just pull that tab up and release the connector. Of course, I can't do that with one hand, but maybe I can. So we'll just disconnect that, get it out of the way. Get this pigtail, more or less out of the way. This yellow lever here, that will drain the fuel bowl so that when you take the fuel bowl out, it's not going to be so full of fuel. And the other end, let's see if I get a good view here. The other end of that yellow valve is the clear line here. If I get my other hand here. So this is the fuel line that comes off of that yellow valve. And it kind of just points down to the ground here. Try to get a bucket or some sort of suitable container so that you're not spilling on the ground. And open the valve. That'll release a little bit of fuel pressure and also drain that fuel bowl. Okay, so once that fuel bowl is drained, you can go ahead and close the valve again. From there, we'll loosen this nut on the top of the fuel filter housing. I believe that's a 13 mil. We'll loosen that, which will then allow us to drop the bowl and the fuel filter out at the same time. And on this vehicle, since we've got the Hydro Boost brake controller, or brake booster, we'll sneak the bowl out about like this. So get all this stuff out of the way and see if I can catch that on camera. Okay, so like the banjo bolt, I'm using the same ratchet, extension, universal, but the socket over here, that's a 9/16, so that's the one that seemed to fit the best. 14 was a little tight for some reason, so 9/16 will break this nut loose with the ratchet. It's not on that tight, it's just snug. All right, once we get it to where we can loosen it with our fingers. All right, so this is a two-handed operation. We've got to loosen that with our fingers while supporting the fuel bowl so that it just doesn't drop on us. And we'll snake it out of here. That nut loose, the fuel bowl's loose, so you just pull it straight down. Oop. Pull it straight down, and then go around all this garbage. And that's how you get the fuel filter out. And to put a new fuel filter in is just basically reverse of that, but you really want to be careful about not getting any dirt up in here. Bonus footage, just doing a quick inspection on the filter. Doesn't look bad at all. The fuel that's in the bowl, I think that looks okay too. It's pretty clear, as you can see. So no issues here. We will go ahead and replace that fuel filter anyway, just as a good practice. Okay, this is the best view I can get of the transfer or lift pump. This is the fuel heater. So this is the hose that goes between the fuel heater and the inlet of the transfer pump. So one thing we will need to do here next is to squeeze these hose clamps and get this hose loosened up. Get the hose loosened up and perhaps removed between these two units. And then we'll attack the other fuel line, the outlet to the pump, We'll get that loosened. As soon as I get the size for that, I'll let you know in the next clip here. Okay, so the next step here after we've gotten the fuel filter off is we need to loosen and loosen these clamps here, these spring clamps. If this is a factory setup, so spring clamps here. I'll show you the tool that I use for that. Pliers work too. So we'll get this hose out of the way. We need to get the outlet for the transfer pump loosened up. So you'll need 2 wrenches for this. This right here is a 20 millimeter. The line itself is a 14. And this guy right here on top of the fuel heater is a 3/4 or a 19 millimeter. So break those free, get this hose out of the way, and then we can proceed with removing the 2 bolts holding the heater and the transfer pump to the block. Take 2 of the camera. It's really limited space here, especially with a camera in my way, but definitely a doable job by a do-it-yourselfer. You just got to be patient like anything else. Stubby wrenches would probably be very useful here. But my stubby wrenches are at work. So I'll just use what I got. I'm not going to bore you with getting these lines loosened, so stop the video here and restart it once I get to a spot where things are more interesting. But as you can see here, you just gotta get stuff loosened. Keep working on it. It's a lot easier in person when you don't have equipment in your way. Okay, something I forgot to mention is you'll want to remove this banjo bolt here for the return lines. There's a couple washers here that you need to be aware of. Oh, there we go, it's a little bit better of a view for you. So this here is a 12 millimeter. Just do the reach around. I'm kind of reached over underneath the brake booster right now. So get this little banjo bolt here out of the way. And again, careful about that washer here. And then we'll get this second bolt here to loosen the line, and this goes to the lift pump. There's a little better view for you. So this other banjo bolt here is a 17 mil. I'm using a flex head gear wrench here to kind of help with a tight situation. So we'll get this loosened. That'll help us with the inlet pipe to the injector pump, or sorry, the transfer pump.
I just like to get it out of the way. And we'll sneak it around the same little hole that we got the fuel filter out of. All right. There is the lift pump. We just need to remove this inlet hose and these two 10mm bolts holding the pump to the block. Okay, so we got the hose taken off of the transfer pump. So now I'm just trying to sneak a long extension and a 10mm to the bolts here. Get these loosened up for you. So now that the inlet hose to the transfer pump has been removed, we got two 10mm bolts that hold it and the fuel heater to the block. So I'm using a 3/8 drive with a long extension, 10mm socket. I'm going to try to break these bolts free. And they're not usually on all that tight. Go ahead and work on that, get those bolts out, and hopefully we'll have this lift pump out shortly.
There's a second bolt. Now with any luck, we just get this off the block.
Oh, I forgot to mention, I removed the, unplugged the electrical connector to the fuel heater. So now we've got to be very careful pulling this out. We do not want to lose the piston that rides on the camshaft. I'll show that to you in a second.
Yeah. Of course, now we have this fuel line that we forgot about.
And this whole thing just comes out. Same place that I pulled the fuel filter out of. So I pulled it out like so. Get this on the bench. Now this is the piston I was talking about. We do not, sometimes these get stuck in the block, and if you pull the pump straight out, this will get caught in the hole and drop into the block, and you are in a world of hurt if that happens. So be sure that comes out with the pump and pull it out in such a way that this does not get caught on the opening in the block. Okay, so now we can separate the lift pump or the transfer pump from the bracket that the fuel filter heater sits on. They share the same mounting point. So we'll clean up all the gasket surfaces, front and back. You can see here this one kind of broke free. We'll just get a gasket scraper and clean that surface up. I'll clean this entire thing up just to make it look better. And on this side, the gasket came off with the pump just fine, nice and clean. And then don't forget to clean the part of the block right there that the gasket sits on. Now is also a great time to either do the fuel heater eliminator kit that's available, or replace the strainer that's in here. So I'm going to get to cleaning here, and as soon as I get everything cleaned up and ready to go, get the camera going again. Something else I need to note is you will need to transfer this fuel inlet elbow to the new pump. So the square block part here, that's 1 inch. You'll need a 1-inch wrench for that. And the nut back here that you'll need to hang on to get this loose is a 1 1/8. To help with reinstallation on the new pump, I usually put a mark on the elbow here just so I know more or less where I need to get it lined up on the new part. So that's just a quick tip here. I usually scratch it in the elbow right here so that I can clean it and still be able to see it. I've noticed that when I've used paint marker in the past, I've ended up cleaning this fuel inlet elbow, and the mark went away and I lost my reference point. So I find that scratching it is a better solution for that. So we'll get this transferred over to the new pump and we'll proceed. So here's the new pump, direct from Cummins. There's the new inlet. There's the old elbow that I've cleaned up. We're gonna put some pipe dope on here, thread sealant. Not too much, just enough so that it seals, and then we'll tighten this down and line up our mark to my reference point on the pump here. And I still have to clean the fuel heater, but just thought I would show you what this new part looks like before I put it in. The thing that makes the install of these things so much easier is if you grab some of these studs to thread into the block so that you don't have to worry about getting these bolts lined up and whatnot. If you put these studs in the block, it makes it so much easier because then you can just set everything in place. So go ahead and thread one in. So then that allows you to slide the gasket on, and then the fuel heater, and then the lift pump. Okay guys, I got a little ahead of myself. I forgot to get the camera rolling. But anyway, so what I did here is I put the first gasket onto the block, and then I put the fuel heater over that. Now I've got the second gasket in place. So the next thing to go on is the fuel pump. Again, be careful with this plunger. You do not want to lose it in the block. Like if you pull it out and you're not paying attention, it'll hit the lip of that block and you'll lose it. And if you lose it, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Okay, from here, we'll start getting the nuts started. Okay, that one's started by hand. Hopefully we won't lose it. Oh, and I lost it. I'm gonna have to find the bolt or the nut, and we'll be right back. Okay, so as we were before I lost the nut, this time I'm using a magnet, so I really can't see with you guys in the way. But this is a royal pain in the butt. Trying to do this and not lose the nut. But trust me, if you were using the bolts, you would be screaming. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're just torquing these evenly as best as we can. We don't want to go too excessive on either nut. Just trying to pull it up evenly. See if we can get this snug down. So hard. I need to get both hands in here to torque this properly. Pretty snug. So now we just got to get this hose situated, clamp down. And I'm gonna have to move you because the camera's right in my way for this. So, stand by. Okay, so got the hose on and clamps on. Had to use a little bit of WD-40 to help this clamp slide up here. But this is a new hose. I always recommend replacing this hose when you're doing this. Just good measure. And now everything's just reverse of how we took everything apart. So, we'll pull this cap off. Carefully feed the line. Making sure not to get any dirt in here. And again, patience is key. Not a whole lot of room to work on this stuff. Oh, hallelujah, threaded in. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do this to this one. Start tightening things up. I think this one is a 14. Okay, before I go too hog wild on this one, I'm going to put the banjo bolt back through on the filter housing. That way I don't screw myself up top. So right now I'm working on the banjo bolt on the filter housing that goes to the return lines. And then there is a little return line that goes up on top of that banjo bolt. So there's a second banjo bolt, and that one's the one that comes from the injector return lines. Which I showed that to you earlier. I'm just putting a second banjo bolt on top of this one. Snuggering her up. You don't want to go too tight because these are hollow banjo bolts. They will snap if you torque them too tight. So now it'll work on these two. In this fitting, we just want to go snug. That's snug. Same with this one. Snug. Again, you don't want to over tighten those. Just go snug. Okay, so now that we've got the lift pump back on, the fuel heater back on, we'll just connect the wires back up and work on putting the fuel filter back in. Okay, we got the fuel filter we're gonna route it kind of underneath the brake booster here and over to that spot over here. I don't know if I'll be able to do this with one hand, so there's plenty of other videos online that show you how to get these Dodge filters on, so I'm not too worried about it. So I will get it over there. Keep in mind, you do not want any dirt here, so put a clean rag over it as you're maneuvering it down into the hole. In fact, I'm gonna go grab a rag right now. So once you get the filter up to its spot there, there's a little notch in the side of the filter housing right here where my thumb is that you want to line up with the valve here. So carefully just offer it up to the housing. From here, tighten down that center nut. Do it slowly. Make sure that valve here fits in the notch here. Do not over tighten it. Just go very slowly. Once again, I'm sorry for the poor camera work, but as you can see here, I've got the filter started. There is a little bit of wiggle room in this slot here. I like to keep it towards the back so that we avoid the linkage here. And from there, we just continue to tighten this until it's snug. Okay, so the fuel filter is snug now. The next thing to do is just to plug everything that you unplugged. So if you unplug the water and fuel sensor, now the time to plug it in. The shutoff solenoid, if you unplug that, fuel heater, you know, etc., etc. You want to plug in everything that you unplugged. Triple check it. Make sure your hose connections are tight. So the next thing here is if you don't have a pressure gauge fitting like this one, you would have another small banjo bolt like this. Loosen that banjo bolt. Either one's okay, but I usually would do this one if you don't have the fuel pressure gauge here. Loosen that banjo bolt and then push on the hand primer right there hundreds of times until you start getting fuel out of the air bleed right here. Once you get a nice steady stream of fuel, go ahead and tighten down that small banjo bolt and then pump a half a dozen times or more, and that should bleed the primary system out. Anyway, I've got the gauge hooked up still, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a broomstick or something and pump her up until my fuel pressure gauge shows pressure. Here's my pressure gauge. I've pumped it a half a million times. My arms are tired, my fingers are tired, my thumb's tired, but I finally got it to the point where it's holding pressure now. So I'm gonna go clear my tools off of the truck and we'll start her up and see if my repair is successful or not. So I've gotten all of my tools out of the way, made sure that all the hoses and banjo bolts and everything, wire connectors, everything that I tampered with to get the pump out has been put back in place the way it should be. You know, you always want to just double check. You know, it sucks when you do a customer job here and forget something and they, you know, it's a comeback. So as you saw in the previous clip, I used the hand pump to get most all of the air out of the primary system. You know, I just kept pumping and pumping and pumping and pumping until I got a little bit of pressure and the pressure stayed. So it's a good indication that the system's free of air, at least on the primary side. Normally, if you know, pump that primary system, normally if you get that primed, you generally don't have to purge the air out of the injector lines. So let's give this a shot. Let's give it a start up, let it idle, and see if our pressures are improved over the 5 psi or whatever it was we had before. Oh yeah. I don't have a snubber on that fuel pressure fitting there, that adapter, so you will see a little bit of fluctuation like that. But for idle, that's pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and rev the engine up to about 2,500 RPM, no load. just to see what happens with the pressure. It should rise up to 35-ish. Okay, well, as you can see there, pressure is now where it should be. Everything's good to go. I'm gonna clean up my mess here and deliver the vehicle back to the customer. I'm happy with that repair. Sorry about the crappy video work. I'm gonna try to edit it and make it as clean as I can, I guess. It's really difficult to get a good vantage point for the camera because there's not a whole hell of a lot of room in there. The brake booster and everything's in the way, but hopefully that would give you at least some idea what to do for replacing the transfer pump or the lift pump on a 1997 Dodge Ram 3500 with the 12-valve Cummins. Anyway, if you like this video, please hit the like button. If you've got any suggestions on other videos that you'd like to see, or other comments, just in general, I like constructive criticism, or if you even like the video, just say why you liked it, or just tell me how I can improve things. So, hope you're having a good day, and we will see you next time. Thanks.